Hey guys, Larry here. Today we'll be doing a video about One Piece. So I'm really excited to talk about Op12 and the new format now that we have the Banlist out, and now we're entering into a brand new set and a bunch of new cards. And it's a really interesting time, really exciting. So I've got a few slides here today just discussing what I think will be important takeaways and important preparations to make for this format. I think this format is definitely going to be a bit more aggressive. We definitely saw last format, we saw Bella Betty, we saw Zoro, we saw a bunch of decks come in to sort of counter Blue Purple Luffy, and the format was kind of warped around Blue Purple Luffy. We also saw Red Green Smoker as another deck that came in. And I think this was out of necessity. We needed to be able to proactively attack into Blue Purple Luffy and really just deprive them of resources in the early game and try and aggro them down before they build their impenetrable wall of Dawn and Katakuri blockers and Big Mom healing their life. So it's that was a very important part of the format. Now I think we've moved on, and of course we've got a ban list now, which has removed a lot of the Blue Purple Luffy power, and a bunch of new cards have come out, so really keen to discuss that today. So let's have a look here. So what are we currently looking at for the meta in OP12? So we've got a bunch of new decks that have come out. We've got two very strong aggressive decks that have come out, namely Zoro, Green Zoro, and Red Rayleigh. They both play very differently, but they do have a bit of similarity. Obviously, their main goal is to be attacking a lot and putting out a really threatening board. Rayleigh does it with smaller units, and then Zoro obviously can play higher costs, but tends to use more of the leader effect to attach Dons and really battle for the board and then attack into the life aggressively. So, but we also still see Green Purple Luffy, which was a mainstay last format as well. We had it pop up from EBO2, and it was right out of the gate one of the best decks of the format, if not the best deck of EBO2 format. And then going into OP11 format, it was one of the best there, probably top 3 deck. It has a very good, it's very good at being able to set up defensively, but also put on a bit of aggression with that secret Luffy from EBO2 with Rush. But I also wanted to call out that Blackbeard had a very strong place as a control deck. So whilst we've got the two aggressive decks in Rayleigh and Zoro, Green Purple Luffy can be a bit of both. It can definitely wall up, and it's got a lot of defensive capability, but it can also be quite aggressive with the Sanji Puddings and the Luffys. Blackbeard is definitely more of a control-based deck. I wanted to call out that Blackbeard had a lot of good matchups into a lot of the slower decks that required their on-plays, a lot of decks that required a lot of board presence and interaction. Blackbeard was able to prevent the opponent from being able to use their on-plays, and then it was also able to KO a lot of the board too. So Blackbeard might have a bit of a tougher time now with a bit of the aggression, but we'll talk about more kind of tech cards that we can be playing proactively into the format. Zoro has a lot of units that provide Don to the leader to facilitate its leader effect. So it can be very overwhelming, especially with that 5 cost Tashigi, being able to rest down an original cost of 6, attaching 3 Don, and then being able to swing in for 8 twice, once on the character and then once at the life. And then later on it snowballs with the 8 cost Mihawk and Cavendish and you name it. The restand event, it's got a lot going for it. And then Rayleigh, of course, can build a very wide board of smaller characters. They're able to boost their characters' attack stat, and they're able to do a lot of 5 and 6 and 7k swings across the board and really pressure the opponent very early. And it's also got a very strong defense in that their events can also double as as 2k counters, and they have bonus effects as well. So very, very efficient use of the cards in the Rayleigh deck as well. And there's so much search. I'd say out of any deck I've seen, it's got the most amount of searches. It's crazy. So many one-cost searches, and then so many of the events are able to be searched. There's a searcher event as well. It's crazy. It's really, really good. Let's see what's changed from the ban list. So lots of speculation before it happened, but now that we're after it, we can see that UP Luffy, Blue Purple Luffy, we've seen a number of changes to that deck. So previously it was stifling. You couldn't really, the late game, it would just dominated. It would heal its life, set up blockers, make these really, really big boards with Sanji and whatever body that it wanted to play off the top of its deck. You were able to sack your deck, you were able to leave Don up for Gum Gum Giant, for Gear Second, you name it. Very, very strong. Now they can't include those cards, the 8-cost Katakuri and the 9-cost Lin Lin, in their deck. So they don't have as much defense, and they don't have their life gain anymore. So it'll be very interesting to see how that deck adapts to that. Blue Black Sakazuki is back. That deck was a menace back when it was legal in OP5 and OP6. It's very interesting though, because it was a very different game then. We've come a long way in terms of how many cards have been released, what decks have come out, game mechanics, etc., leader effects. So it's going to be interesting to see if Sakazuki can adapt to the amount of changes that have happened in the game since a year ago. And historically, black decks have been very good at countering decks like green and blue, and it's been very tough for them. But green, at least recently, has gotten a lot of anti-removal support for the archetype. They've got the 3-cost Ashigi, they've recently got the Koshiro blocker for slash attribute, they've always had Rosinante, so they've always had a bit of protection. Blue, on the other hand, it's a bit tough. They don't have a whole lot of anti-removal. There's obviously been a few bits and pieces here and there, but it's been very vulnerable to removal historically. So we'll see if Sakazuki does have a place now he's back. I know a lot of people are very keen to play him, and it's a fan favorite, so we'll definitely see a bit more. And finally, we have Nami banned. So Nami, a deck that I personally have topped with, so I definitely understand how strong the deck can be, and I understand how adaptable Nami can be as well. She tends to include a lot of tech cards as the formats change, and because Nami was so prevalent, there'd always be someone topping with Nami, there'd always be a different list coming out to counter what kinds of things were happening in the format. Yes, in the past she has struggled with aggressive decks and decks that could really go wide and just hit her a lot, but there's a chance that if she was still around, she would be taking for these matchups if people still wanted to play her. So, but she's banned, so we're not going to have to worry about that. And it means that Bandai can design blue cards that draw, which is very exciting. Obviously, there's been a reprint announced for the promotional leader for Nami, but I don't think overall it will necessarily have such a huge impact, if at all. So, but that remains to be seen. Moving on, I want to talk about some counters for the meta. So, a lot of discussion has been had on Twitter, through circles. I want to shout out my friend Kam Stephen. I'll put his Twitter down in the video description. But we were discussing some possible counters for some of the matchups and some of the decks that we expect to be quite strong. So recently, Enel and Bonnie have actually been have seen a resurgence in popularity. They do have a lot of tools that they can use to deal with a lot of the situations that these decks are creating. And Nell definitely has that factor of healing and being immortal and having these really strong triggers. And Bonnie having that really strong defensive leader effect to rest down leaders or characters. It's going to have to make Zoro choose how they want to attack. and it really helps stave off the aggression. The green units as well, they have a lot of utility. So there's cards like Cavendish, there's cards like Carrot, really high quality top end cards like Eustace Kid, like Shanks, 10 cost Doffy, that freezes 3 units. All of these cards are really excellent at fending off aggression and really creating a board presence. So I can imagine that with the Bonnie deck, that they'll be leaning into the more defensive, trying to build their board and then go for game then. Enel specifically has received a couple of upgrades actually in recent sets. I know Enel has not been a very popular deck because he had a really bad matchup into Blue Purple Luffy, but he's actually seen a couple of upgrades recently. So there's a 6 cost Kuma that has come out in OP12, heals on 6 Don by trashing a card, and it heals on KO as well. They've got an event, a Merfolk event, which can place a 6 or less onto life. So I know Enel loves to place a lot of characters onto life, and they like to sort of control the board by removing the characters early on and then summoning their big units and removing them and healing, and that was the whole game plan. So those cards really assist with furthering that game plan and help you, I guess, extend the game longer when Zoro's attacking into your life and when they're setting up their board of Cavendish and Tashigis and stuff. Also worth noting that the event, the Ultramarine event, it places onto life, so it avoids cards like Rosinante and Koshiro, which say, you know, if a character would be KO'd. In Koshiro's example, specifically a slash character. So very interesting tech cards that can be used for Enel. Calgara and Kuzan are also worth mentioning, as well as Shanks. Calgara recently got some support in OP12. It got a new Calgara card, and then it got some searches just to increase the consistency of the deck. I think Calgara historically has been a very aggressive deck, a little bit inconsistent just because it didn't have a way to search for the inbuilt healer of the deck, the Norland, the Mont Blanc. It now has a way to search it, A, and B, it's got more copies of Calgara, which again was another bottleneck in the deck. And that new Calgara that they have has a very strong effect that allows them to draw cards. So it's going to be really imperative that they have these cards, and they're going to be able to have a really high board presence as well as hand advantage now, whilst being able to lay on the aggression. Being able to summon a body of the leader effect is really strong. Kuzan, really good at having a strong hand as well. It has access to cards like Gravity Blade, to Charlotte Pudding, Red Rock, and then all of these wonderful Navy cards that we're seeing in OP12. They're excellent. They don't get rested down by Tashigi because, you know, like Sakazuki, Garp, even Aramaki back from set 6, they're going to need something like a Hody Jones or a Dead Man's Game event to really get those cards rested. And they're a massive swing. They're 8k and really lay on the pressure. So Kuzan has a lot of defense. It's able to keep up its hand. I think those qualities are really good into an aggressive deck. Being able to counter and cycle your deck, wonderful. Shanks, there's always been different lists for Shanks that people can play. In the past, we've seen aggressive decks, we've seen control versions, we've seen mid-range, you name it. The red card pool is quite big. The Shanks leader effect is really good defensively, being able to obviously stop, being able to be more efficient with your countering, so changing a 7k swing into a 6k and then being able to discard one card, a 2k, to get out of that attack. Or even being able to reduce something like a Zoro or something like a secret Luffy that would restand and attack again. It reduces it by 1000 for the whole turn. And cards like 4-cost Shanks as well, the new blocker from OP12, able to reduce something by 2000 power for the whole turn. So we're going to be really looking at effects that have a turn-wide effect and are able to provide a bit more utility at more given points in the game, so you can use them to your advantage there. Let's move on. I want to discuss some useful and interesting cards that have popped up and I've seen in some deck lists, and I've also been discussing these tech cards that have always been cards that people have put in and out of decks, depending on what they need. Some of these tech cards they have the utility of being able to fend off aggression, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we need to focus on, at least early in the format, is staving off the aggression. Cards like 10-layer Igloo and Lucky Roo in the red decks, really strong at being able to reduce for the turn. And then Lucky Roo is a great blocker, but being able to KO something else with 6,000 power or less on KO means that you're able to block an attack, but also destroy a unit as well. Maybe something like a Cavendish, or even just get a pesky blocker off the field like a Koshiro or whatever else they might have on the field. These two cards for Enel, so the Arc Maxim and Merman Combat Ultramarine. This event, obviously, as discussed before, is really good at just shoving something onto life. Enel likes to just control the board by putting things on life and then setting up the board and then going 9, 9, 9, 10, 9, like big swings later on. It doesn't matter if you've got 10 life. When they've got 5 units with 9,000 power or more, they'll just go bang, 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 bang. You'll take a bunch of life and they'll effectively put you on a clock, or they'll put you in a position where you can't deal with their board. So being able to stack things like Tashigis, Cavendish, your against Luffy decks, you can put their 6-cost Luffy, the Sanji Pudding if it wasn't increased by the stage. And then the Arc Maxim here is actually an interesting tech that you can play in NL, where against Rayleigh specifically, being able to set this up means that you can KO all of their searches and some other 2 costs that they play in the deck, like Boa Hancock, or there's a 2-cost Luffy that's puts 2 Rested Dawn on himself and is immune to strike attributes. This card doesn't obviously hit 3 cost, 4 cost in the deck, but you'll be surprised, Rayleigh does set up quite a few of these 1-cost searches like Shakuyaku, Buggy, Nami, and then the Boa. You can actually just clear these each turn. It's an activate main once per turn, and it's a stage. So if they're setting up this, all you have to do is just rest your leader and this, and then KO these cards. So if Enel's priority is keeping the board clear and then getting to that late game to heal and control the board, it's not a big deal if you're not swinging for 5. If you're not getting even like any leader swing in at that point. Usually Rayleigh likes to take 1, 2, 3, even 4 life throughout the course of the game, has a massive hand, has a bunch of 0-cost events that protect it, and relies on its board to really swing and provide the pressure to win the game really quickly. Having a card like Arc Maxim really alleviates a lot of the pressure there, so it could be an interesting tech, I think. The Murakumo Sword, a card that you can play in Sakazuki but also in Kuzan. It's a Navy searchable card. Bottom decks a 1 and a 2. In Kuzan, obviously you can't reduce cost, but the logic is still there. If you're versing, say, a Rayleigh deck, there's definitely targets for that. So could be a searchable 1 of or 2 of or whatever you would like, and can really stave off some of that pressure as well. And a trigger will activate its main effect too, so that's nice if it's on your life. Got Black Vortex. I've seen a lot of people starting to include this in their black decks. I know that I've been personally playing a bit of Koala. I'm actually creating a video about Koala at the moment, so I'm using this card in Koala because one of her worst matchups is Zoro, and having this card is actually really strong. It eliminates the leader effect, so they can't restand. It reduces by 4,000. It's very strong, so if you're playing a black deck, definitely something to consider there. Electrical Luna. Some green decks are starting to play this one again, just to reduce the amount of aggression that your opponent is going to have. This is a very valid option if you're looking for something to just freeze the board, and then if you complement it with something like a carrot, you've got a great way to stun your opponent's board, keep the characters rested, and then you're able to deal with it more gradually rather than having to have all of these swings come at you at once. 9-cost Zoro is a tech that can be used in the Zoro deck, so keep your eye out for this, because this may be the counter to some other decks that are trying to counter it. So 9-cost Zoro can obviously be searchable by Slash attribute by Perona, and it's an option for Anel, to counter Anel rather. Yellow has lost Rygo, the event that KOs anything, so clearing this is actually going to be very hard. So just keep your eye out on this one. I think it's a legitimate option to counter some of the other slower decks as well in green, and it's sometimes you drop this card and it's game over. It's just so strong. And then the last card is just Hell's Judgment. I think this is a really interesting option for purple decks, and I think that, you know, if you're playing like a purple Luffy deck or you're playing some kind of purple, this is definitely an option if you can spare the Don. It's a Don -1, so you know, if your deck does Don minus a lot, or if you can't really afford to play off curve, it can be a bit tricky, but the effect is very legit into Green Zoro, reducing their character or leader for the whole turn. So definitely a really good one here. There's so many other techs that we could talk about, but these are just some that come to mind, and worth exploring. So try to include some from most colors that we're playing at the moment. If you guys think of anything, chuck them down in the comments. Be very interested to hear. So just some key takeaways. I think that aggressive decks are looking to be very strong this format. Zoro, Rayleigh. We're gonna have to see some decks and some strategies adapt around that. So I think it's a good opportunity for players to get creative in finding ways to deal with more aggressive strategies. Purple Luffy decks too, I wanted to mention because they pretty much weren't hit apart from blue-purple Luffy losing Katakuri and Linlin. Katakuri and Linlin can still be used in any other purple deck. So purple Luffy loves those cards. Black-purple Luffy can definitely still use Linlin and other Katakuri and other cards like that. It definitely plays a bit more of a package catered to its leader effect, but it's definitely still an option. And then we still have Gum Gum Giant, so one of the best events they've ever printed, can be used in all of these decks. So that's definitely something that provides these decks a bit of an edge into aggressive decks, having just such a reliable way to counter big swings. And with something like Purple Luffy, definitely massive card pool for purple. So they're able to ramp up, they're able to play out something, heal with a Linlin, or set up a really strong blocker, or really get to that position in the game where they're building their board with Luffy Taro and drawing lots of cards with Sangoro, etc. Or we could see a completely different approach to the list. Something with Hell's Judgment, something a bit more defensive, more blockers, something like that. Who knows? Also got Lucci and Red Green Smoker here. Red Green Smoker was one of the dark horses of last format, and I still think that Red Green Smoker is very strong. It got a lot of support from Op12 as well, in the Slash Searcher, in the Mihawk. It's pivoting more towards an event-based Slash searchable build with you know, using a lot of the Dawn efficiency that it gets from its leader effect and being able to restand from Mihawk. And the deck's very, very strong. You've still got access to so many of your cards, but it's going to be about how that deck is going to be built and what kind of direction we're going to take it. Lucci is obviously something that we always talk about. There's always going to be someone playing Lucci, and there's always going to be someone who's going to make it work. This is the same situation. I think Lucci has an advantage over Sakazuki in the fact that it's a 5-life leader, and you do have a bit more of a defense going on there. It's gonna be interesting to see how and if those two decks do compete side by side, because I do think there's obviously some advantages to having the blue color, but then there's obviously some advantages to having an extra life. And my last thought is, I think that people may even begin to counter the decks that people are using to counter the current decks, which I love that kind of triangle, or that little mind game of, oh, you're gonna play Zoro, so I'm gonna counter you with an L. Oh, everyone's playing an L now, I'm gonna counter you with this deck. And it's just gonna create this really interesting dynamic, I think, where there's so many viable options and there's so many counters to these viable options that you could see some leaders that might be traditionally a bit more tier 2 or tier 1.5 pop up because they have really good matchups into these decks that counter the decks that are some of the best decks. but also we might see some of these best decks being counted so much that these decks fall out of favor a little bit. So it's gonna depend on how people perceive the format and how people really want to approach it. But we've got New Zealand coming up this weekend in Oceania, and me being from Australia, keen eye on how our events shape up. But obviously, being in the West, it's not just us. But I'd be really interested to see how people approach the format, and yeah, see if there's any spicy cards that people wanna put in their decks, or any spicy leaders that we didn't really talk about. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this kind of content, please like and subscribe. Really helps me out, keeps me motivated, and yeah, you'll be seeing more One Piece content on your feed, and really keen to keep this up. So thank you so much. Have a nice day.